This lesson will be Chapter 1, Section 3, which is entitled Civilization. So now we're moving out of hunter-gatherer lifestyle, out of settling in villages, and now we're starting to develop cities and other forms of civilized ways of living. One of the things that I think will be really important here to take note of is going to be that this section in the textbook is called a case study. So it goes into a great deal of depth about the city of Ur as an example, which was from the region of Sumer in Mesopotamia. Now, what I generally start the class with is an anticipatory set when we're in person. And I generally like to ask, what are some of the reasons that people would choose to live in cities? All right, what are some of the benefits there as to why people might want to live in a city? And also, we also talk about what are some of the negatives in a previous lesson. Now, what we'll start with here is Roman numeral 1. We'll talk about how villages grow into cities, and we'll talk about some of the general changes that take place during that time. What you have are stable communities that are based on agriculture. Okay, if you don't have agriculture, it's a little bit less stable. Number 2, you have domesticated animals becoming more popular after 8000 BC. New tools are being developed to help increase the food supply, such as the hoe, the sickle, and plowing sticks. Settlements that had a plentiful supply of food could also support a larger population. One thing that history students have to understand is as the food supply increases, so can the population. You cannot really successfully increase the population if you don't have an increase in food supply. Capital letter B, we'll talk about some economic changes. Larger villages began to build elaborate irrigation systems, which led to food surpluses. Now, irrigation systems resulted in a lower demand or a reduced demand for farmers and villagers, then began to pursue other jobs and developed other skills. This is a thing called specialization, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So you don't need as many farmers once you have irrigation, and so people then start to take other jobs or look for other forms of work. Some people turn to crafts. The craftspeople or the craftsmen, people who created valuable new products like pottery, metal objects or tools, and then cloth work, woven cloth, or what you call today textile workers. Important inventions like the wheel and the sail further increased mobility and opened up big-time trade options. Capital letter C will focus on some of the social changes that occurred because of moving into farming centers and cities. Social classes began to develop. Villagers started to seek other jobs outside of farming and hunting and gathering, and then they started to develop other skills. So with the level of skills and the importance of what they were making and the money that they could make off of that, social classes began to emerge by varying levels of wealth, power, and influence. Religion also became more organized during this time. During the Old Stone Age or Paleolithic times, religion was kind of centered on animal spirits and nature spirits, kind of like the wind is a spirit, the rocks have a spirit, the trees are a spirit. In the New Stone Age, in the Neolithic times, you had polytheism starting to develop, the worshiping of many gods and goddesses who were believed to have power over what people thought were those nature spirits in the past. So power over the rain, over the wind, over the sea, other forces of nature. Next, we're going to dive into what's most important about this section is the definition and the understanding of civilization. Really, having an understanding of this will be very important for my class. This is going to be on the first quiz. This is going to be on the unit examination. This is going to be on the midterm exam. This will probably still be, assessed on the final exam for my class. So understanding how we define a civilization is extremely important. So I'm going to go a little bit slower here to make sure that we have a good understanding of that. Civilization is defined by the book. Now, not everybody will agree with this, but by the book, it's defined as a complex culture with 5 characteristics. Those characteristics are advanced cities, specialized workers, complex institutions, record keeping, and advanced technology. Now, let me give you some examples, some explanation over what would qualify each of these 5 characteristics. So first would be an advanced city. Advanced cities would be qualifying if they are centers of trade for larger areas, meaning this city has trade coming in, has items going out with other areas, That would be an example of an advanced city. Size and population alone don't really distinguish a village from a city. It has to be a large center of trade. It has to have a market. It has to be a viable option for people to come and sell and buy goods. Number two is specialization. This is really important because specialization is the development of skills in a specific kind of work. For example, tradesmen, government officials, priests, farmers, blacksmiths. Basically, once we have a food surplus that is developed, it allows people to become experts at jobs outside of farming. Most people early on became artisans or skilled workers who made goods by hand. Artisans became workers that could make jewelry, metal tools and weapons, like a blacksmith that we know of in more modern terms. And also they began to be people who made clothing. The good thing about this is that if you're a person who just makes hammers, right? You become a blacksmith, you make hammers. What eventually happens is as you make that hammer, you say, aha, what if I put two metal prongs at the back? Then when I hit a nail, I could pry it back out. So technology also develops out of specialized work as well. Next is the third characteristic, complex institutions. First of all, to understand what a complex institution is, I think it's important to understand what an institution is in general. An institution is a long-lasting pattern of organization within a community. Here are some examples. A government system, a way of ruling, a church, religious practices, religious rules. Those are all examples of long-lasting patterns of organization within an institution. Religious temples were centers of worship, but also during this time, the temple was the hub of government as well. And even economics was being utilized in government. And I work at a Catholic school, and so I'm Catholic myself. And when we talk about the temples being places of economics, this is one of the reasons why Jesus Christ in the Bible got angry that they were buying and selling things at the temple, and he flipped over the table. One of his only kind of uses of what some people may call anger there in the written Bible. Now, one other thing that I would say is that when you're thinking about other examples of institutions, you might want to say, hey, we are in an institute. We're in a school. A school is a long-lasting pattern of organization. Prisons are long-lasting patterns of organization. Things of that nature would be examples of institutions. Next would be point number 4, record keeping. Record keeping is important in civilizations because what would happen is government officials would want to keep track of taxes that were owed, taxes that were collected. They would want to write down their rules and laws. They also want to manage the storage of grain. It was very important to understand how much food you had in storage, so how long you could survive should there be a drought or a war or some type of roadblock to producing food. Now, merchants, they would record accounts and debts and payments. They would do this on clay tablets early on in the Sumerian world. So record keeping was extremely important. Around 3000 BC, we had our world's first true writing system, which was cuneiform. Scribes were professional record keepers in both Egypt and Sumer, and you can still use the term scribe today. But cuneiform is a wedge-shaped writing system that was invented by the Sumerians. I'm going to use a reference to the textbook here. Here's an example of cuneiform. These are some actual Sumerian clay tablets. And you can sort of see that there's a lot of triangular shaped, what you want to call symbols really there, because cuneiform was more of a way of writing with symbols that stood for ideas and words and other thoughts. Okay. Point number 5 is the 5th characteristic of civilization, and that is advanced technology. Here are some examples of advanced technology: irrigation systems, utilizing animals to plow fields or pull wagons later on, so on and so forth. Sumerian metalworkers actually developed a technology of discovering bronze by melting copper and tin together around 3000 BC. So bronze is actually discovered if you melt copper and tin, you have the proper mixture there. I'm not an expert on this, but you have the proper mixture in there. When it hardens and solidifies, it creates a stronger substance called bronze. And this gets us into the Bronze Age. So we go out of the Neolithic age into the Bronze Age, which was a time when the use of bronze tools and weapons replaced copper and stone tools. And the Bronze Age lasted from 3000 to 1000 BC. Now, what the book does next is it goes into a civilization model of the city of Ur, which was located in Sumer. Ur is actually one of the earliest cities that we know of. It was located along the Euphrates River, which is in modern-day southern part of Iraq. Talk a little bit about how city life was in Ur. Most people in the city of Ur lived in one-story, box-like, and windowless homes that were packed tightly along the streets. People entered their homes through a hole in the roof. That's how they got in and out, and they would cover that hole with some type of platform. Now, the reason that you wanted windowless homes is that in this region, there are quite a few storms that kick up a lot of sand. It's also very hot. So if you have the sun baking down in through an open window, that could create a problem. Merchants in the city of Ur would trade crops, and artisans and people that were making crafts in what the city's marketplace was called the bazaar. The bazaar is kind of what they called marketplace back then. Point number 3, money has not really yet been invented, so there's no true form of currency. So people had to exchange goods by bartering. Bartering is the trading of goods and services without money. It's basically, I'll give you 3 chickens for a bushel of apples, or I need 5 hammers. I'm willing to give you, a bushel of apples, or 4 or 5 chickens, whatever the going rate was established at the bazaar. That's how people would barter back and forth. Capital letter. Now, letters of credit, IOU kind of system, those were things that were utilized at this time. But as far as coinage or paper money, that has not yet been put into use. One of the most important places in Ur, or in any Sumerian city, and in many early cities around the world, was a temple. The temple, or the Ziggurat in Ur, was the tallest and most important building. The word Ziggurat in Sumerian literally translates to mountain of God. It's a pyramid-shaped monument to the gods, or a god. What they would do there at the Ziggurat would definitely be involving sacrifice, mostly of the goat or a sheep. Sometimes they would also sacrifice and provide other food sources like plants and other smaller animals. The Sumerians had actually elaborate burial rituals, and they believed in an afterlife. They had a patron god named Nana, which was the moon god. And also, one key thing about is that Abraham, the founder of Judaism, is believed to have come from the city of Ur. One of the things I do want to say about the Sumerian belief in an afterlife is much different than what you might study in other civilizations and cultures. Their belief in the afterlife was pretty grim. They believed that you had an afterlife, but it was really a sad afterlife. It was kind of like you got recycled into the dirt and the soil. Okay. To close things off, to check for understanding, there's a brief timeline on page 24 of the World History Patterns of Interaction book. This is something that I would refer students to do, to take a look at some of the key events that were happening around this time. This section ends chapter 1. So as we move forward, we'll get into a review sheet and starting to get ready for the first quiz of the year.